if you're not disabled right now, you're what you're called temporarily abled.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Talking Inclusivity with the Hive. I am Tonya Whitlock and the founder of the Hive Inclusive Community Nonprofit. We are building inclusive, affordable housing for adults with disabilities in the Tampa area. This podcast is to highlight the stories of our members and our community leaders who are dedicated to making a positive difference for individuals with disabilities in our society and promoting a culture of inclusion. Today, we have Carrie Hay. Carrie is a integral member of the Hive. She's one of our advocates. She also assists us weekly with our social media and just advises us on many things. And so we love her. And I'm so grateful, Carrie, that you are on today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm so grateful that you're here. So one of the major reasons that we were talking about having you on for this podcast is because of a kind of unexpected season that you went through with injury. And, I just think many people with disabilities are going to completely relate to your story, but the rest of us can just glean so much from just the realities of how one injury could definitely, cause a major conflict for the rest of the areas in your life. So I just wanted to talk about that. But before we start, could you tell us a bit about, your disability?
Yeah, so my primary disability is cerebral palsy, and what that it is brain damage to the part of the brain that controls movement and motor skills. So for me specifically, cerebral palsy affects everybody differently, but for me, my movements are more rigid and stiff. I have more difficulty with balance. I walk with a slower cadence, and fine motor activities are more challenging for me.
And you live independently.
Yes, correct.
Could you tell us about your journey to living independently?
Yeah. I lived with family members until the age of 20, and then around the age of 20, I transitioned to student housing. I lived with roommates for a couple years. And then when I was about 24, I said, I think I'm ready to just fly the coop, so to speak, and try living independently. And so I've lived on my own now for the last 15 years. I know inclusive housing is a huge struggle and affordable housing is a huge struggle for so many, but it was just divine intervention. The right apartment opened up in a safe neighborhood and affordable, with affordable features that I could afford. I really feel like it was just divine intervention that just orchestrated everything.
Wow. And what were some areas that you had to kind of fight through as far as living independently? Was there a major transition for you from going from being with your family to living alone in your own apartment?
So for me, yeah, I'm fortunate enough where I'm able to do stairs as long as there's a handrail. But I have to have the handrail to be able to balance myself. So carrying things like a laundry basket up and down the stairs is not going to work for me. So fortunately, they make things that are like a drawstring backpack where you can just load your clothes in like a little drawstring bag and carry it down the stairs. Where you may just have plans A and B, somebody with a disability has to have plans A through Z. So things like that. I've learned, not only navigating the laundry situation, but what do I do? Like if, a light bulb goes out and someone isn't able to help me change it. I've learned how that I can stand on a step stool, hold one hand on the step stool, and then be able to balance myself with the other hand to change the light bulb. Just things that you don't think about until they happen.
Yeah.
Another incident that comes to mind is, let's say, I'm working on the stove and I want to ground some meat for like spaghetti or pasta. So people would, pour the grease into the pot. Well, that's not going to work for me. So what I've learned over time is I will line the bottom of my sink, like with paper towel. So no grease goes down the drain. And then from there, I will use a strainer to pour the hamburger into the strainer. And then while it's doing that, the grease is being absorbed into the paper towel as to not go down the drain. Get all the grease and everything out. Then once all the grease is out, I take the hamburger and transfer it back into the pot from the strainer. So those are just a couple examples of things that I've learned to adapt over the years.
Yeah, and it's interesting you said that individuals with disabilities have just a natural inclination, but I would say that because you've always had to figure it out, you've become experts at it, right? Like you've
Yeah.
always had to adapt. You just, and which is it's great, in spaces. We've talked about this. It's so good, and it's why people with disabilities should be at the table of every space, because that natural ability to think outside the box, to create adaptations when needed, to be resilient and move to the next. Those are amazing skills, but definitely I can see how much it helps you living independently. Another thing that comes to mind too, and I'm sorry this wasn't one of the questions I gave you, but I'm just, as you're talking, I know that a lot of caregivers and individuals with disabilities are concerned about safety when you're living alone.
Mm-hmm.
Was that an issue for you, and how did you respond to that?
Yeah, so it was a primary concern of mine. I had to think like, you know, where am I going to live? Is it going to be a safe neighborhood? Not only like inside my surroundings, but obviously like the neighborhood of itself. Sometimes things that are a little more, affordable aren't always in the best neighborhood. I'm thankful that again, it was just like divine intervention, everything lined up where not only am I, in a safe like building itself, physical building, but the neighborhood is safe. And I've lived here quite a while. So my neighbors know me, I know them. Like we kind of just look out for each other. And that's one thing where I'm very fortunate is where I live here. I don't worry about my safety.
That's
I mean,
huge.
you have to be aware of your surroundings and just be cognizant and smart. But I'm not worried about like somebody gonna like drive by and shoot, or is somebody gonna come beat down my door, that type of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah. So, currently, can you just describe, before we kind of get into the accident, can you describe, like where you currently work and what your normal working life looks like?
Yeah, so I work for a nonprofit organization called CUP, or Coffee Uniting People. And the premise of that organization is it is a coffee shop that employs individuals with and without disabilities so that everybody has the opportunity to work. And within that role, I'm a barista, but I also serve more as a shift lead or a team lead. So I can help make the drinks and run the coffee shop in that aspect, but primarily my role is to serve alongside individuals who have greater support needs with their disabilities as like a job coach, helping them overcome any hurdles that they may encounter while they're in the workforce, and just providing reminders, tips, and tricks to get the job done.
Amazing. And so you have this job where you're working as a job coach, and completely independent and going, getting to work, doing all the things that you need to do. You're living independently. Now, take us to the accident, and just kind of, just to bring everybody in the audience who's listening on the same page as we are, like what happened, and well, let's just start there.
Yeah, so funny enough, I was on my way to birthday party for a friend who had fallen and broken her ankle. So we were taking her out for a birthday lunch to cheer her up and just to support her in her birthday. And it had been raining, and I got out of the car and it was wet. The sidewalk was wet. And I just went to step up on the curb. I slipped, fell backwards. And when I fell backwards, I twisted my leg too far back and I twisted my ankle to the right. So when that happened, it was so fast, but also felt like it took like 5 minutes. Time went by so fast and slow at the same time. I had bent my leg too far back and twisted my ankle. And next thing I knew, I heard pop, pop, pop. And I thought, oh boy. About 10 years prior to that, I was walking and I fell and I um, landed on my arm, and I heard the same kind of pop, pop, pop. And I thought, oh Lord, please don't let anything be broken. And so I got up, and assistant manager came out. They helped me walk into the restaurant. I was able to like lean on them, move very slowly, and I was able to get to my seat. And I, sat through lunch. It didn't hurt. If I didn't try to put weight on it, I was fine. So we were at a Brazilian steakhouse. So I was able to have someone help me go up to the buffet and get my food that, I wanted to eat. And then after we'd finished lunch, I said, I'm going to go. There's an urgent care across the street. I'm just going to go get it checked out, just make sure nothing's broken. At that time, it hadn't swollen. It wasn't black or blue or anything. Everything had stayed the same. So I went, they did x-rays. The doctor said, looks like it was just a bad sprain. If it's not better in 2 weeks, follow up with your primary care doctor. So 2 weeks had come and gone, and it was still tender and hurting when I walked. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to just follow up with my primary care like was suggested. So I went back to my primary care. He asked me what happened, and he said, did you fall like this? Like when you fell, did you turn your ankle inward? And I said, yes, that's exactly what happened. And he said, oh, it sounds like it's just a sprain again. We can do x-rays again, just to, rule anything out. But I think it's just a, sprain, and they can take up to 6 weeks to heal. So I said, okay. Went on my way. At that point, a week later, it still wasn't getting better. And at this point, I'd been on bed rest for like a week, and never had I been on bed rest and just permanently rested, and things are getting worse. So at that point, I had a friend who was a nurse who said, if you go to like the ER, they will do an MRI there. You can get your MRI and be able to, keep it moving. Because at that point, when I saw my primary care doctor, he said, I don't want to waste your time sending you to an ortho that's just going to show a sprain, and there's nothing we can do for a sprain. It just takes time. So I followed the advice of my friend who was a nurse, who suggested I go to the emergency room. So I did that, went to the emergency room. I'm telling them, the whole story of everything. And she said that the nurse practitioner, or the PA, the physician's assistant, comes in, and they're asking me everything, and I'm just repeating what had happened. And they said, okay, well, we can't do that type of MRI here, but we can do a CAT scan. So I thought, okay, great, you guys are the medical professionals. I've told you I'm concerned about a break, and you'll be able to do a CAT scan, and you guys know what you're looking for, so a CAT scan will show a break or whatever. So like 4 hours later, all they do is a CAT scan. They do a CAT scan to see if I have a blood clot. Well, I never came in with any, symptoms of a blood clot, complaining about worries about a blood clot. And so when they said, oh, great news, you don't have a blood clot. I said, well, of course not. I never mentioned anything about a blood clot. I don't have a blood clot. And at this point, I'm getting upset and agitated because I'm having to tell them, hey, I live on my own. I don't have someone there to help me with the day-to-day activities of life. Like at this point, I told him, I said, I can't even take my own trash out, let alone, I'm having to crawl to the bathroom. Like you guys are just acting like, oh, it's just a bad sprain and it can take up to 6 weeks. And so I said, please, can you wheel me over to the hospital next door? I need to get this MRI done. And she was like, all right, well, let me talk to my manager and see what I can do. And so she comes back and she's like, okay, we're going to do the MRI. And then the nurse is getting all my information. 5 minutes later, she comes back again. She's like, bad news. She's like, x-ray said, because your CAT scan came back clear and your x-ray came back clear, we can't do the MRI. I said, you got to be kidding me. I said, what do you want me to do? I don't understand why I cannot get this CT, or I'm sorry, this MRI done here. And she is like, well, here's a referral for an ortho, follow up with them. And so at that point, I just left. I was livid because not only that, but like 3 people that day had asked me if I wanted crutches, as if crutches were going to make my life easier. And I told every single one of those people that I did not have the strength and coordination to do the crutches. And I just, in that moment at the ER, not only was it a 5-hour waste of time, but I felt not heard. No one was paying attention to the fact of my disabilities, what my limitations were. No one was caring that I lived alone or giving me resources for how to navigate, the season of living alone. And I felt ignored and frustrated, in pain, unheard. It was just really an exhausting experience. And that was in 30 plus years, that was my first time ever at the ER. So it was just not a good experience.
Carrie, goodness gracious. So, first of all, and you just happen to also be one of our advocates as a part of a new USF initiative that the Hive is taking part in when it comes to helping medical doctors be more cognizant of disability needs.
Mhm.
But like you are just all of the things, even just in the ER, and you're right, like even with your primary care provider, if people don't understand, they cannot treat you like the
Yeah,
normal patient that's coming in,
yeah,
because one, your body's going to respond differently to different treatments, and two, just like you said, you are you are living off of borrowed time because you're trying to figure this all out. You have an injury at home. You don't have support in the house. And so, and none of these things are kind of being considered. So I'm just so frustrated for you. But how did you ever have a moment where you did reach out to say, is there a resource that I could call in and have somebody come in temporarily to help me? Or
yeah. And then it was, well, here's the wait list. Sign yourself up. 6 months. Of course, everything is a wait list, which I understand. To get assistance, there is going to be need of a wait list, and it's just these things need to be available when needed, not just this 6 months add you to the wait list type
yeah,
thing.
yeah. So did you eventually ever get the MRI?
I did eventually. I had to communicate again with my doctor, who said he didn't want to waste my time because he didn't want to send me to an ortho to just waste my time. And in that moment, like we had said, he should have said, I'm not really familiar with your disability, let me just humor you and send you to the ortho, just make sure nothing's broken. So I reached back out to him, and of course you can't talk to anybody in person, everything is done electronically through their portal. Finally get him to explain the situation where I was at the MRI in the ER and felt dismissed, and he sends a result for the MRI, and then I'm calling within that healthcare system, that organization, to get the MRI, and they're like, oh, the soonest option we have available is a month from now. And I'm like, wait a minute, why is it a month from now? And no one told me, hey, when you have that script, you can go to any MRI center. So that was just someone who had told me that. It was just like a friend of a friend who told me that. And thankfully, I was able to reach out to another organization, got an MRI like that week. And lo and behold, the MRI showed a break. And that at that point, we're 6 weeks into the injury
Oh
now.
my goodness. So what did you do? What'd you do next?
So then from there, I followed up with an orthopedist. In the Bay Area, it's an organization that's like well known. They've got different branches here, and at that point, still the nurses were kind, but doctors. One thing I would caution anybody who's in like medical school, and I know you guys study hard and you've worked hard and you've earned those degrees. It's just, don't forget your bedside manner. Don't forget, when you're following up with somebody, take those 30 seconds and review the chart before you walk in. Don't ask me, what happened, what have we tried. This should be information that's on the paper. Just read the paper before you enter the patient's room. Take those 60 seconds, 30 seconds, and become versed with the patient. Um, so I met with him. He gave me like an open air brace that went from the top of my thigh to the bottom of, my ankle. And thankfully it wasn't a weight bearing bone. Not being a weight bearing bone is going to affect you differently than somebody else who already has a mobility issue. So even though it wasn't a weight bearing bone, I still struggled because my gait was off. So I was able to, navigate things slowly with a cane. I needed to sit a lot more. It took me a lot longer to move about than it does normally when I don't have an injury. But that brace was able to give me a little bit more support and stability while walking.
We now have about 6-7 weeks of an injury that you beforehand didn't really know what the major cause was. You're living home alone. How in the world did you navigate? There's waiting lists in order to get help. How did you get things done?
It just goes back to, having a disability and just having that natural inclination to be resourceful. Um, I was able, I used like a rolling chair with wheels to scoot myself around my apartment. And if I couldn't do that, then I would just crawl to places. I would crawl from like my bedroom to my bathroom, crawling, using a wheeling chair, using my cane, um, putting things like in bags to carry, on my back to make things easier. I don't know. It just, you become resourceful in that moment. You just figure out, okay, how do I got to do stuff and you get it done.
I mean, not just resourceful, Carrie, resilient.
It was challenging, and because everybody kept saying, "Oh, it's just a sprain," I thought, goodness, like, is this going to be my new level of mobility? Because I had worked so hard my whole entire life just to be independent and stay mobile. And I just felt like I was not taking one step back, but taking 10 steps back. I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to function in life, from what I'm used to. It's going to be a huge adjustment. Like, I thought this was going to be my new norm. I'm like, at this point, it was taking me like 15 minutes to go from my bedroom to the front door to answer the front door. I'm like, I can't do anything. Yeah, it was a season of not only being having to be resourceful, but also like a season of depression, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm glad that you are being honest because I am 100% confident that there are people listening who have absolutely been in the same position. And actually, I know even from our own community that there are people that have been in that position who've had the injury. And just like you said, we're so afraid of not being able to gain that strength and independence and mobility back and actually ended up not being able to. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, an injury that's, again, maybe simple to somebody who does not have those physical challenges, could be life changing,
Yeah.
for somebody who does. Um, and so let's talk about how did you, well, first, I don't want to skip over this, like the depression that came with that. How did you deal mentally? How did you cope?
Um, and that was hard too, because a lot of like my friends and my support system, they didn't quite understand, like what it was, and they were like, "Well, you got to start thinking about like, what do how are you going to do this? What if it's permanent?" And I'm like, I just need to figure out first whether or not I have a break or not. Like, and then I can go from there. They're trying to think of like big picture, a year from now, 6 months from now. I'm like, I first need to just figure out if it's broken or not. And then I'll be able to go from there. And they were kind of like, hey, well, you don't need to be depressed. You just got to keep moving. So it was a hard season as to like, who am I going to let into my circle and them, in this moment, in this season, because not everybody is going to understand, because not everybody lives with these day-to-day limitations. So I think it was just connecting with like the right people who truly understood, and then just taking the tips, what I could glean from someone, and then what I couldn't, just putting it aside. That's important. Everybody's well-meaning, everybody's got advice, and I think a lot of it is you just have to filter out what you can take and then just set aside what you can't take
Good.
you know
That's such good wisdom, Carrie. Even especially when you're going through something really hard and that's mentally and physically and emotionally exhausting, the people that you place around you
hmm
is everything. And being able to keep those people that are positive, that understand your situation, that will speak life into you, um, is so important. And so I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's 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 good. And so let's talk about how you rehabbed. Like, what did that look like?
So thankfully, I was able to connect with a rehab organization that I had gone to when I had my previous surgeries. It was Stay in Step. They're an organization here in Tampa that work with folks that have neurological injuries and spinal cord injuries. and they work one-on-one with folks to regain strength or gain greater mobility than what they have. So I was able to work with them to, come up with like an action plan to become truly independent again. And a lot of that looked like working on like strength training, increasing my endurance, while walking on like an anti-gravity treadmill, just increasing my safety awareness, not only in the home but in the community, that type of thing. Navigating different terrain. In fact, I'm still working with them on a weekly basis, in addition to doing like a home exercise program and going to the gym. So it's a wonderful resource for anyone that may struggle with, neurological issues or spinal cord injuries. It's a really good resource here in the Tampa area.
That's awesome. And I remember you telling me about that. And because I remember having a conversation during this time about the difference of going to a physical therapy and occupational therapy space that was not familiar with cerebral palsy patients, and going to one that was specifically created for who are very familiar with the diagnosis and how to effectively treat and to do therapy. The difference
Yeah,
it was.
yeah, because it's not like you're when you're working with somebody that has, a physical, like a neurological disability, is going to be a different rehab component than somebody who has, like a knee injury from sports. It's
Right.
going to be a different, yeah.
Um, well, okay. Wow. So, and now, we can fast forward. How many months has it been now?
It's been about 5 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
So 5 months in, and you're still, doing weekly therapy. Do you feel like you're back to your baseline?
I still feel like I'm working to get back to where I was. I don't know if it's like a self-protective mechanism where my body's like, "Oh, let's just be, more cautious," but I'm still trying to get my stamina back and regain strength where the break was, and it's definitely been a challenge.
So I want to talk a little bit about work, because obviously during this time of, you've already described how hard it was to live independently. So I've got to assume that work also took a toll,
Yeah,
which is scary because work is what pays for your apartment,
yeah.
right? So
It's gives
tell
you
us
livelihood.
exactly. So tell us a little bit about how you dealt with your injury and work, and how, how did work respond?
I was so fortunate to be able to have such like an accommodating employer, because at first when I was told, "Oh, it's just a bad sprain, you really just need bed rest," they were able to like let me you know I was able to stay at home for like 2 weeks, and literally, and it was like when I was staying at home for 2 weeks, it wasn't like a vacation. It was like it took every ounce of energy just to, get out of my bed to go from the bed to the bathroom. It was like a, 30-minute workout. So it wasn't like a vacation when I was on bed rest, but they were accommodating enough for me while I was on bed rest. And then when I was able to come back to work, I was able to come back like on a modified shift where in that moment I wasn't able to do like my job coaching duties, but they would let me like work the register and be a greeter, those types of things that didn't require a lot of movement. So I was still able to work, at the register using a chair, being seated. But I had extra physical support in the shop during my injury time. So they were just a true blessing for me in that season.
So basically, they modified the space for you to be
Yeah.
able to continue to work, which
Yeah.
kept you. I mean, there are so many spaces that wouldn't do that, and thankfully, like you said, you already work for a space that's disability minded. But there are so many people in your position that would have lost their job,
Yeah.
and losing their job would have made them homeless
Yeah.
just from an injury. And so having employers that are disability minded, that are that do see the need for accommodations, and again keeping talent, like you offer much to to your employer. And so recognizing that this is just a season, and that, and also I think too, I mean, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but when you have an employer who stands by you and helps you through seasons like this, like they have your allegiance, because it's like, wow, like thank you so much for doing what I needed to be able to help me and support me.
Yeah, absolutely. No, 100% tenfold. That's going to make me um, be, cognizant of like, hey, the next time someone else has an injury, I'm going to be first one to offer to step up and say, how can I help? Or an emergency or just however, I mean,
Right.
because you don't think about it, but having that injury even took away things like I had a cane, so I was able to walk, but because I needed that cane, I also needed one hand free. So I couldn't even do things like carry a cup or a plate because I had both hands. I had one hand that I needed for the cane and the other hand I needed for balance. So I was truly limited in what I could do.
Yeah. Tell me, like, overall, and those listening, what lessons have you learned? What were your biggest lessons from this experience?
I would say the biggest lessons, there's a couple. One is um, don't ever take for granted what you can do on a day-to-day basis, even people that aren't disabled. Because as I learned yesterday, during the workshop working with USF, if you're not disabled right now, you're what you're called temporarily able. So you're not disabled yet. So don't ever take for granted your current level of mobility. And that's for myself. Just stay appreciative for what you can do. It also taught me, even though it was a season of like depression, it also taught me, to focus on the gratitude, focus on the things that I have, focus on, that I had people that were willing to help me, that I had employers that were willing to make accommodations, that I had the mind to be resourceful, that I had the cognition to be able to think outside the box. Those are, all things that we should never take for granted. So
So
just
good.
focus on gratitude, be appreciative of what your current mobilities are, and then it keeps you humble. That's another thing. It kept me humble.
I love too that you mentioned temporarily able. Every single one of us are temporarily able to do all the things that we need to do. But you're right. Like we're all hopefully going to have the opportunity to age. And as we age, our bodies will change. We will need walkers. We will need wheelchairs. And so you're right. Like every single one of us, if we are given the opportunity to live long enough, are going to have accommodations. Thinking like that now and understanding that this is not just one community's concern, it's all of our concern. Accessibility is all of our concern. Is so good. And I love your what you said about how you thought the whole time, and trying to stay have a having a heart of gratitude and
So
gratefulness,
important.
which is also hard. So not wanting to pass over how difficult that season was. And the worst thing I think sometimes is to tell somebody, oh, just be grateful for what you have when you are in the midst of such a traumatic struggle.
Mhm.
But I do love that you were able to focus on what you were grateful for. So I guess I want to end with um, with what I was just saying about those people that are right now going through a struggle, feeling hopeless, scared about their future potential of being able to be independent, or whatever that looks like. What would you tell somebody who's at this point right in the middle um, of the depression type space that you were at?
I would say just hang on, even though it feels like it's going to last forever. No season, good or bad, lasts forever. So your struggle that you're in, even though it feels insurmountable, I promise, day by day, it will get easier, and you will learn the skills to just adapt, but also to acknowledge your feelings and let yourself, allow yourself the space to feel what you're feeling. But I promise things will eventually become manageable. It may be different. It may not look like you had ever planned, but eventually you'll find little things and little tips and tricks to be able to maneuver to make your life meaningful and impactful.
I know that I said that was the last question, but I actually want one more thing. I want to
Sure.
end in what is your future goal? Like, what is your aspirations?
Um, I'm really working with the disability community. That had been something that I'd always wanted to do. I want to continue doing this in some fashion. I don't know if it's going to be with children or continue in the adult realm. Um, I love helping people. I love working with the nonprofit sector. I just want to have an open heart and open mind for whatever God calls me to.
Thank you so much, Carrie, for being on and sharing about your injury and even the whole season, when I got to like just by just listening, hear the things that you were going through. It really did wake open my eyes to some areas that I just didn't realize would be um, such a struggle. So it's good because now that we all, learn and we hear, we can hopefully be more um, effective in individuals who have seasons like this of injury.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing your story and being vulnerable and honest about the good and the bad. And I'm excited to get feedback and from others who are able to listen.
Thank you so much for having me, Tanya.
Have an awesome day.
Thank you for joining us on Talking Inclusivity with the Hive. We hope the stories shared inspire and empower you. Remember, every voice matters and every action can make a difference. If you haven't gotten the chance to listen to the About Us episode, a link will be provided in the show notes. Learn more about the Hive's journey for inclusive housing in Tampa. If what you hear resonates within you, join the movement. Hit subscribe and join our tribe. Let's continue to build a world where inclusion is the norm.